What are the hardest armies to paint in 40k? Warhammer 40k has loads of factions across the entire game. So that's going to be factions that are easy to paint, that are hard to paint, that have loads of details, that have not many details, that have high model count, that have not high model count. These are the criteria that I'm going to use to try and determine which ones are going to sit in this tier list. As usual, guys, I'm going to give you a caveat. These are my opinions, not necessarily everyone's. So if you disagree with any of these, drop a comment below and tell me what you think you disagree with. I think I've been relatively fair and objective here, even with the ones that I think I wouldn't want to paint personally. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's start with Space Marines. Space Marines are an interesting one. So basically, they have a lot of models that are probably quite large, smooth surfaces, which may be seen as probably something that's quite easy for a beginner. And that's what I would say as well. I think that these models are pretty good in terms of the large open surfaces you can work with, in terms of the the potential to try and practice some freehand if you want to do that, and like put some tryout decals, which makes them very beginner friendly to try and have those large surfaces to try and do. Also, mainly the assembly for beginners, very easy. When it comes to painting, there's loads of painting guides online for them to be painted, like, how to speed paint Ultramarines, how to speed paint Blood Angels, maybe even how to approach Black Templars, how to weaponize contrast paints with them. All of these things exist for obviously every army, but Space Marines specifically have a lot of content on this. So you could definitely whack out an army pretty quickly as a beginner, even with just like a few colors. As a caveat as well, I have put all the Space Marines into one category because yes, there are different colors. Yes, there are different, ways to paint it. Yes, if you're trying to paint white scars as a beginner, it's going to be hell. Yes, if you're trying to paint yellow as a beginner, it's going to be hell. But ultimately, the core concepts here are there's not many models in the army. There's not loads. There's not a monstrous amount of details that you have to get worried about. Like a lot of them are optional as well. You don't have to glue on the pouches on some of the models. You don't have to glue on the grenades if you don't want to. And the hobby that you put into this army is basically as much as you would like to. Like even down to the Aquillas, I sometimes just scrape off the Aquillas with a scalpel just to save myself painting those, and also I don't think they look that great. So on that basis, I'm going to whack them into beginner friendly tier. I'm not going to say that they're monstrously easy. I'm not going to say that they're like the easiest army ever, because ultimately there are easier armies and there are also harder armies. So I'm going to still say that they sit in probably beginner friendly, and we'll go from there. The next time we have is the Necrons. So the Necrons are, I would say, I really like the model range. Like, the new Nightbringer, the new Votann, all that sort of thing are super interesting. Lots of large flat panels and lots of interesting ways that you could try and start practicing highlights as a beginner, as you've got lots of large areas to try and practice. And if they don't look great on the highlights, it doesn't really matter, especially for tabletop standard. If you just get those, highlights in the same sort of area that you want them to, even if you just weaponize dry brushing on the large panels and on the metallics and stuff like that, it's all going to look pretty damn good. Another thing that Necrons take really well is contrast paints, as I mentioned earlier. I'm going to mention this every time, and also it's also about model count, which we're going to try and gauge with this as well. Now, Necrons can be highish model count, but even then, the support around your larger units still mean that they're going to be investing quite a lot of points. Like you might have a reanimator here or there, or like I've seen triple DDA and stuff like that, or Doomsday Arc for people who don't know what that is. And I think those sorts of armies don't have many models as such, like not only model count, but they are large models, but they're also quite easy to paint if you approach them in the correct way. So for a beginner, like if you're going to be doing DDAs, for example, maybe look at some sub assemblies for the U that goes around it, the croissant, and all that sort of stuff. Because ultimately, when you weaponize those sorts of things, I feel like you're going to be able to approach this army and get it done really easily. On that basis, I've put this into the category of one of the easiest armies ever. Like, I do think they are. Like, they always were a classic army. You can weaponize metallics on these really, really, really well. You're basically looking at a metallic, a spot color, and a detail color for the entire army, and that doesn't really change apart from when you're looking at katans and stuff. Obviously, you can be crazy and be one of those guys that does NMM on every single model, and that's no shade to the person who I'm talking about. I'm not going to mention him because I don't know if he wants to, but his army looks incredible. He's won loads of best painted events. But basically, Necron's one of the armies as well. You can do beginner friendly, you can weaponize them twice, you can dry brush them all, or you can spend weeks and weeks and weeks on them, and they will look incredible because you've got some amazing models that you can use, like Amantar, the new Catan, even the old Deceiver model looks great. So yeah, first one in the easiest armies ever. Next one's Astra Militarum, Imperial Guard for you old folks out there. So effectively, Astra Militarum is one of the ones that I think has a really high model count because it's guardsmen. Yes, you can go for lots of tanks and go for the parking lot sort of thing, but you're still going to have about 60 to 70 troops behind that, or that's minimum. A lot of these guardless that you see nowadays is going to be like a Dawn or two, some horses, and then like 200 infantry. Now, on this basis, I think you can see that this one's not going to be the easiest army to do. However, there are ways you can approach this army that sort of give yourself some a good chance of getting this. Ultimately, one of the main things for beginners, they are humans with guns and armor. So in terms of your thought process and going about this, it's quite easy to pick a color scheme. It's quite easy to try and establish the sort of the vibe you're going for. So ultimately, you could go for desert Catachans. You could go for jungle Catachans. You could go for Cadians on a snow planet, all that sort of thing. And because they're all just humans, it's quite hard to mess them up because they all have the same theme. Now you can say that about every army. But when you look at like armies with lots of different units in terms of color schemes, like Aeldari aspect warriors and stuff like that, this army does have the coherency, which does help. So you're painting flesh, an armor color, and a cloth color, and then an armor casing color and some metallics. So from that perspective, I don't think it's too bad. And in terms of skill level to try and paint, it's not monstrous. Like you can also weaponize contrast with this quite a lot as well. Same with every army, but this one takes it on really, really well. And also it's one of those armies that you can really use washes and dry brushes. You can use the same dry brush for the cloth and the armor if you use a similar hue, and all that good stuff as well. So on that basis of that, and on the color scheme that you can sort of do yourself, I recommend this will be a challenge. I don't think it's going to be horrific, but it's definitely going to be a challenge. But also it's going to be a challenge. But this doesn't mean that it's going to be, impossible to do and all that sort of thing. And model count doesn't necessarily mean difficulty. It just means time. So that's why I haven't put this lower. When you have a high model count army that then has loads of details, loads of things to approach, really hard to paint and all that sort of thing, then it becomes a little bit, that's when it starts to become quite horrific, which is where I would be putting the horrific armies to paint in that section. But for this one's going to sit right in the middle, will be a challenge. Thousand Suns. Thousand Suns get a really bad rep for being really awful to paint and being really horrific to try and paint trim and all that sort of thing. Now, these don't go unwarranted, guys. So the trim isn't your normal trim. So you've got trim that goes around circles, you've got trims that goes around in weird areas. If you've got areas, especially if you're a beginner, where you're not sure whether it's trim or whether it's supposed to be that blue and yellow stripe thing, and there's so many opportunities to go wrong here in terms of brush slips, in terms of, you're going to end up going back and forth, trying to paint in panels, painting trim, going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I wouldn't recommend it for a beginner, but you just have to go in with the correct mentality. So going with the correct mentality, which is going to be, I'm going to mess up the trim at some point, I'm going to have to fix it. Then I'm going to mess up the armor panels at some point and have to fix the trim. And as long as you get that in, your soul, and you believe it, and you know that to be true, you're going to be fine. But I will, however, put this into a horrific army to paint, because also you've got a Primarch to paint, which is not the easiest Primarch to paint in the world. You've got skin tones, which aren't your normal skin tones on that Magnus, and it's really hard to get him right, especially as a beginner. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be, badly painted, or, to be honest, if you're a beginner painting an army, it might not be brilliantly painted. But that's okay, because ultimately every model that you do, you get better. And also my first model was a Tau Fire Warrior painted in black acrylic paint and Tau Septoka. And that was about 16 years ago. So that was an embarrassing one. But yeah, Thousand Suns go right down into horrific army to paint. Absolutely not. Would not recommend. Unless you want to do them, then go for it. So, Adeptus Sorroritas, or Sisters for the Old Guard. So, Sisters, I actually have owned my own Sisters army, and I really loved it. I loved painting it. It was really fun. I had a really, really good time painting it. However, the model count is higher than usual, I would say. Maybe not by much, but just by a little bit, just because by then Sisters are a little bit cheaper than Space Marines, and, they're not going to be hoarding it, but you are going to have a fair amount of models. Now, even though I say this, they are not for the weak-hearted, because I think they're on par with T-Suns in terms of detail, in terms of awkward little things to get to, in terms of little areas of trim. I'd say these guys are on par. Now, the reason why, I don't know if you guys have seen her before, but it's the St. Catherine mini with the sarcophagus on the back. That is a beautiful miniature. However, it is 5 models. It's a diorama, effectively. It's a diorama that you have to do in sub-assemblies, and so make sure you get it right, because ultimately if you try and paint that without a sub-assembly, it's awful. I did it. It was bad. But ultimately, this range all has lots of tiny little details and lots of little things you can get wrong, and I made a few mistakes on them, but I enjoyed the process. But I would definitely put them on par with T-Suns, right down there with horrific to paint, just because the level of detail that's on there takes ages. The model count's slightly higher than usual, so on that criteria, we're going to whack them down. Chaos Knights. So this time we're on to our first big stompy robot faction. Now, I think you'd expect these to both sit in the same area, but they're not going to, as a disclaimer, and I'll tell you why. So the Chaos Knights, first of all, are, again, incredible minis. I really like them. Lots of detail on there. Probably I'd say more detail than the Imperial Knights. Just because you've got all the Chaos little gubbins and all that sort of thing. And, you know, it can be harder to approach the trim because they're in different shapes. They're not as sleek and slender like in the Imperial Knights. Another reason why the trim's worse to paint on Chaos Space Marine models or Chaos models in general rather than Imperial, they're just not as smooth. Just because they're in jagged areas, they'll have a random bit flicking off into the middle of the armor panel, which you can inevitably get wrong and all that sort of thing. But ultimately, I still don't think this army's horrific to paint. It's a low model count. We love that. But they are big models. So it's kind of hard to gauge. But for me, I would put these into, could be a challenge, but I think there's a lot of cool things you can do with this army. Like, I think there's a lot of really cool, like, freehands, or you can practice doing your transfers for the first time on this miniature. There's loads of really large areas. If you're just starting to use an airbrush as well, great when you start using an airbrush on, because, you know, if your paint goes on thin, you can just keep trying again. They're literally big, large, flat armor panels. We love that stuff. So yeah, they are going to sit into, could be a challenge. And we're on to the next one. Orks. So I have a skewed view of Orks for a couple of reasons. I did a 12-hour painting challenge a while ago. 24-hour painting challenge a while ago. And I failed. And the contents of that was effectively a combat patrol plus 10 knobs plus a battle wagon. Now, I did not do the smart thing in this challenge and remove all the details that don't matter / don't really add. So that'll be stuff like stick bombs on a belt, or, you know, like 6 sets of pouches, armored boots, stuff like that. Like any details like that, you could just remove with a scalpel. I just didn't. Now, I'm not saying you have to, and if you want those details on there, then you're fine. But this army is relatively actually quite difficult to try and paint. Now, luckily, you can zenith these in contrast and dry brush and weather the hell out of them, and they're gonna look good. Because that's one of the good things about Orks. It's hard to make them look bad. Which is obviously a great thing. It's a great beginner-friendly thing to have. Obviously, the model count is quite high. So I would say for beginners approaching this, it could be a challenge. But it's not going to be horrific. Like, it could be much worse. There are much worse armies out there, and you can weaponize a lot of these, you know, really speed painty techniques on these, and they're going to look fantastic. Okay, so Custodes. Custodes, I'm going to put into one of the easiest armies ever. We're going to get that out of the way right now and we'll explain why. Really low model count. You can weaponize metallics. Metallics are really easy to look good as a beginner. You can spray it with a gold. You can zenith it with a bigger gold, or dry brush it with a lighter gold. And then do washes and, you know, unifying washes across it. And that's the majority of the work done. After that, you're on to some cloth and some faces. So for that, and the fact the really low model count, we're going to put them into one of the easiest armies above. If you want to start doing Custodes as well, they've just got a brand new range out. They look fantastic. You should go check them out. And yeah, let's go to the next one. Death Guard. So Death Guard are one of my favorite Chaos factions. Like, I think that they have a really cool aesthetic in terms of the grimdark sort of aesthetic you can sort of, you know, use for them. The model count is relatively low, which is nice. You can weaponize lots of really cool weathering techniques and streaking grime and all of these new, like, interesting things that you may not have done yet. They're just all going to look good on Death Guard, especially if you just sort of slap it on. The only thing is there is a bit of trim, but there's less trim than the other factions, I will add. The other thing that's quite intimidating about this army is Mortarion, because Mortarion can be quite intimidating to paint. Like, look at him. He's awesome, and, you know, it can be really intimidating model to pick up as a beginner. But just paint him last is what I'd recommend. Because if you just start painting, the difference between your first miniature and your 50th miniature is going to be big stonks. So, you know, just try it out and see, it'll be fine. So because of this, I'm going to put them into beginner friendly. I think this is probably one of the Chaos factions that people might disagree with me on, but I do think this sits in beginner friendly. The details aren't monstrous. There are a couple of characters with a few details, but I don't think that's enough to bring it all down. So yeah, we're going to go beginner friendly. World-Eaters, our next Chaos faction. So World-Eaters, I actually have painted about 80 Berserkers, and I've painted Angron. I've actually painted Angron a few times because I've done commission pieces for him as well, and they are awesome. They look fantastic. However, there is 1,000 1,000 bits of trim. It's basically, it's not as bad as 1,000 Suns because the shapes are a little bit easier to follow, but there is a lot of trim. That's what you're just going to be prepared for if you're going to do it. There's a few ways you can do this to make it a little easier on yourself. You can spray the gold and then paint the area, or you can spray them with a color and paint the trim. Either or. I think, to be honest, I don't really see much of a difference in the time and between the two. I would personally never spray gold, personally, just because if you spray everything gold and then you're painting in between, not only are the armor panels also, not only do you have to fix the arm panels, you have to fix everything else around it. So if you spray it gold and it's not a primary color, and you have to go in and paint the faces, the pouches, the the vents, and all that sort of thing as well. I actually think it's gonna take more time out of your day than just painting the trim, especially on worldies where your primary color is going to be red. So for that reason, it's a Chaos faction. It's going to sit into, could be a challenge, but it's not the worst one that you could have. Grey Knights, one of my favorite factions. I love Grey Knights. I use them a lot, and I enjoy painting them. Mainly because they're easy. Like, I'm not gonna lie, they can weaponize silver on it. You've got a blue hue that you can just do with an ink, or you can do with a really thin down glaze. And there's lots of techniques on this that you can weaponize to make them look great. I know I've said that sentence a few times, but ultimately that is something that you're going to see at the top of these armies. Like anything I put into a tier, like, into easiest army ever, the highest tier that we can, it's going to be an army that could weaponize these things and just look fantastic anyway. So for that reason, I think you know where this is going. It's going to go into easiest army ever, and then we're going on to the next one. Adeptus Mechanicus, or Mechanicum, as the heresy mains would say. This army looks awesome. I've also done an AdMech army. I know I'm going to say this a lot, but I've done pretty much every army at this stage. But the AdMech army is, number one, very expensive. I'll pre-warn. Like, if you want like a 2,000 point army, like I think someone worked it out once. There was an army that was going around at the time. It was about 700 quid, which might sound reasonable now, but at the time it wasn't. And AdMech are just very expensive models. You've got a £40, 55 point character, for example, or a £35 box, which costs 60 points. And that's just the general vibe of AdMech. It's just stuff that is cheap, can go off and score and die and, rinse and repeat and score points, right? But for painting, that's not ideal. So assembly-wise, these guys are pretty bad to do, to be honest. I've painted up. Sorry, I assembled my entire AdMech army. They're awful. Then the Sky Stalkers to paint are fine, I suppose. There's like webbing on all the wings, which is awful, but we won't get into that. But to use them at the table is awful. Like, you're gonna have a wing poking out somewhere. For in terms of like maintenance, in terms of having to fix things that break if you take them to tournaments or if you take them for games, is awful. Like, if the stem breaks on those Sky Stalkers, you'd have to pin them. If beginners pinning stuff and magnetizing stuff like that isn't normally ideal. So they look fantastic, but good lord, they're awful to build. And also to paint, there's a metric ton of details on these. There's loads. So many. Like, you want to do OSL on the eyes, you want to do different weathering effects on the metals, and the details are just insane. So for this is going down to horrific. I think, for the record, this is the worst army to do as a beginner. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but again, I think this is the worst. I think if they're not in order at the bottom, because I think they're all bad. But if I was going to pick one that was going to be the worst army for a beginner to do ever, it would be AdMech. So let's go on to the next one. Tau. Tau look awesome because they have lots of really big smooth surfaces, and they have lots of big cool little robot men. Now, I think these guys are going to be quite easy to approach, just because there's not loads of details on them. There's not loads going on, but they still look great. So, for example, the Humble Fire Warrior is armor, pants, maybe some grenades, and a little ball on his gun. I'm blacking out some bits. So, for that reason, I think these guys are going to sit into one of the easiest armies ever, just because I've done combat patrols of these in 12 hours, and they're fine. Like, they're not hard to do. They are quite easy to approach. You can get a lot of them done in a very short space of time. And, even when it comes to weathering and stuff like that, it sits really great. And also, the sponge. A sponge is your friend here. Just get a sponge and just weather and just do some little stippling and stuff, and it'll just look fantastic. So yeah, these guys are going to sit into one of the easiest armies ever. Aeldari. Aeldari are my baby. I love Aeldari. They're fantastic. And I have enjoyed painting them over the many years that I've been painting Aeldari and doing my collection. However, there are 5 different color schemes. To all account, lowish, average, I'd say, average amount of models. But there's 5 different color schemes for aspect warriors. The characters are insanely detailed. The characters also naturally put pressure on beginners, I think, because they see the box art, they see other people's paintings of them, because people paint them for golden demon entries and all that sort of thing, and they go, "Oh my god, I'm never going to make it look that good," and that's fine. Just don't. But for that, I think for beginner friendly, I don't think they're the most beginner friendly. I think there's lots of cool, like large smooth surfaces. If you went for down a Wraith army instead, super beginner friendly, rather super beginner friendly, because you're just painting Wraith Guard and Wraith Lords, which are fantastic and lovely to paint. However, there's a mix between the two, and also I'm going to lump Harlequins into this as well. So between the lot, I think they're about average. I think they're fine. I don't think they're horrific. I don't think they are too easy, especially if you do have mixed arms where you have a unit where you pick up, which is nice and easy. You pick up a unit that's not easy, and you go back and forth. So for these, I'm going to put them into... I think I'm going to put them into will be a challenge. Because even though they sit in the middle, you've got the Harlequins in there. Let's say if you just want one 5-man unit of Harlequins and a troop master and a boat for your your Eldar army. Yes, you don't have to paint the checkers, of course, but there's still lots of detail on all these minis, like the little pearls with the gold rings around it and all that sort of thing. So we're going to sit these firmly into will be a challenge. Imperial Knights. So Imperial Knights are, again, I did precursor this earlier. They are slightly different to their Chaos Knight counterparts because the trim is a little bit easier, and after that, it's metallics and big panels, and the model count's really low. So for that reason, these guys are going to sit into beginner friendly. Now, I've already told you a few reasons why the Chaos Knights were sat into the could be a challenge section. And obviously, a lot of these are going to transfer over. So in terms of there's still nice and large panels you can do practice on that sort of thing. It's fantastic. The metallics around the back, you can do some really cool, interesting things with true metallics, especially if you want to just try out your dry brushing, your weathering, even if you want to go experimental with oil paints and that sort of thing. You can make these knights look really fantastic really quickly. And also there are models you can build on. Let's say, for instance, you start off with painted the panels red, and then about a year later you're like, you know what, I want to do some freehand. I'm going to try it on that shoulder pad because it's still there, it's still available. You can still try it. It's one of those armies you can just keep adding to and adding to and adding to, and until eventually they'll look fantastic. So Imperial Knights, I'm going to put them into beginner friendly, and we will move on. Tyranids are awesome. They have some big monsters, we have some small Grizzlies. Now, model count in this army is going to be varied. It's going to be either 300 models or it's going to be about 50. So, for that reason, I'm going to take model count out of this because there's too much variance there to try and make a decision based off of that. Like if someone said how hard is a 300 Tyranid Gaunt army to paint, I would say that's going to be horrific, just purely on model count. That's it. In terms of difficulty to paint the minis, though, themselves, not that hard. Like, in terms of beginners, like, I've seen people pick up, Exocrines and big monsters, and because I've got loads of large surfaces and stuff like that, you can sort of, express some of your, creativity on that as well. Like, you've seen the coconut crab paint scheme probably at some stage. If you haven't, go have a look at it. It's great. And a lot of people have been using that coconut crab sort of color scheme, and it looks really good. So, and I've seen people who've only been painting for less than a year pick up Tyranids, and they've all looked good, just because they're flesh, carapace, and that's it. And it also gives you a lot of creative sort of freedom on those models, which is really good. So for that, I'm going to put them into beginner friendly. I'm not going to put them into the easiest army ever because, again, the model count is of a large variance. I am taking that out, but also there's still models like the Nero Tyrant and even to the level to a point Hive Tyrant and all that sort of thing, which you do have some difficult bits to paint. So I'm going to put them into beginner friendly, and then we're going to move on. Genestealer Cults. So Genestealer Cults are horrific. Horrific. So basically, I did 2 separate commissions of Genestealer Cults, and the first one was about 3,000 points on or something like that, and the level of detail on these guys is insane. Like, you got little lamps, got little pouches, got little daggers, you got the soft bits on the arm as if it's still a Tyranid. You've got teeth, tongue, eyes. Like, it's just loads and loads of details on these minis. However, though, they look fantastic. Their trucks look really good and they're easy to paint. And the Ridge Runners look great and they're easy to paint. So it's not like it's all bad, but it's kind of bad overall. So this is going to sit into horrific, just because also assembly. There's so much assembly. The model count's so high, and in terms of trying to use it for beginners, unless you're very well versed on streak and grind weathering techniques and all sort of thing, this is just going to take you like months to paint. Especially as a beginner, like when you just first pick up a brush, it's going to take you so long. Yes, you can use contrast paints on these to an extent, but because there's lots of areas that are close together and touching and all that sort of thing, for a beginner, you could just mess that up. And if you're trying to go for Wraithbone and then weaponizing contrasts, and they overlap a bit, it's really annoying. On Orks, it doesn't matter as much because you can just do the darker colors first, dry brush back up, and then go back over with the lighter colors. But you can't really do that here because the models are too small. Like they're too small. Like if you just get it into the wrong area at the wrong time, it can be a little bit annoying. So not beginner friendly, but they look fantastic when they're done. Like I absolutely love the Genestealer Cult minis, and probably like the Calamorph, probably one of my favorite minis. He's just like running around with his little guns. It looks awesome. So yeah, just bear in mind if you're gonna pick them up. But yeah, let's move on. Agents of the Imperium. I was debating whether to put this in or not because I don't know if they're going to be an army soon. They probably will be, to be fair. But Agents of the Imperium is going to sit into will be a challenge, mainly because it's a lot of characters from what I've seen, and also like when you look at the actual breaches, they've got a little dog, and there's lots of little like detail and stuff. The only thing that's good about this is that the model count won't be very high, but I think it's going to be a challenge for a few different reasons. Because when you're approaching an army with like 10+ characters, it's actually going to be quite difficult to approach each one of those because each one becomes its own little mini project. And that's quite, you know, awkward to approach. Not impossible, but awkward to approach. So yeah, I'm going to put these guys into will be a challenge. We'll move on. Leagues of Votann, the Space Dwarves themselves. They are cool. And I think these guys sit in a similar realm to Tau, where there's not loads of going on. There's some details, but there's nothing mental. You've got some really cool minis that you can approach with. You've got the Hearthguard, you've got the new Steeljacks, and they say newish, and they look fantastic. And also, there's lots of large areas to work on, like on the land forts and all sort of thing. I don't know how hard they are to assemble. I haven't actually assembled many, but I would say that they look pretty good. But I would say that they are probably average to a build and assemble. So on that basis, I'm going to put them into beginner friendly because I think they would be completely fine on me for a beginner to start. I think it'd be completely okay. There's some different details to paint, but nothing's mental. You can also use contrast quite a lot. So yeah, it's fun. Chaos Space Marines. This is the basic boys, the ones that are just going to be walking around and doing their own thing. So I think that Chaos Space Marines are pretty bad, but like in a good way. So they are horrific to paint. You've seen lots of painting challenges just not succeed. When you've seen like these 24-hour painting challenges, kind of paint a Chaos Space Marine army in 24 hours, and they just don't do it. And the reason why is they are really hard to paint and hard to paint well. Now, do I think that they could be beginner friendly if they take certain armies? No. It's similar to the Thousand Suns in the trim is awful, but there's also a load of details on top, like mutations. You've got little metallic details, little icons, eyes on trim, like the Horus's eye that just randomly turns up things, like the little yellow ones, and banners and all those sorts of things. Like I think this army's gonna be bad for a beginner, but they look awesome, and I really enjoy painting them. So it still has to sit into horrific for me because I just can't see it being good for a beginner. So let's move on. And Drukhari, the real Space Raiders, the Witch Cult Fanatics, the Edgelords. They look cool. And in terms of whether I would want to paint them, I would want to paint them. Yeah, I'd like to paint them. I've not painted loads of them. I painted like an Archon and like a few Incubi once, just for my Aeldari army, because Ynnari was a thing. But I think that they, in terms of like, I didn't find them hard to build. Painting, I can see them being an issue. There's lots of like armor panels that go overlapping each other, and then you want to highlight and you want them to make them look good. If you're painting them with just from a beginner's perspective, though, I think it's fine because if you're just painting with block colors, making them tabletop ready and all that sort of thing, I don't think that's going to be too difficult. But there is a lot of detail on these miniatures, so I'm gonna put them into will be a challenge just to be safe because I don't want to say this they're fine and it turns out they're not fine. But I think that they will be a challenge for a new beginner, mainly because there's lots of different, details and flesh. And also, it's like, you know, you've got Talos with flesh. You've got lots of mechanical bits. So I can see it. I can see it. So that's the end of the tier list. If you got this far in the video, guys, thank you very much. This is the first video that we've got for 6+ Brush. I've really enjoyed doing it, and I'm really excited to do some more. So if you guys could like and subscribe, that'd be amazing. Drop me a comment below if you disagree with anything that I've said, and all that good stuff. Now, I'm going to be doing my own set of combat patrol challenges coming up, and I have an idea of how I'm going to approach that. But if you guys got any ideas of the sort of combat patrols that you want to see, let me know below, and I'll add them to the list. Now, I reckon that I've got a goal this year in my mind to try and get this channel to where I want it to be. And I'm going to be producing a video or 2 a week. And there's going to be a few shorts and all that sort of thing, so keep up with it. The next video that we've got coming up is going to be some Night Lords. So I'm going to show you that. That's going to be fun. And it's going to basically be my army reveal that I've done so far. Plus some stuff that I'm going to be adding to it and all that good stuff. So guys, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much and much love. Bye-bye.